Good day, everyone. Hope you're well on this wonderful day in February, the 8th, I believe it is. I mean, it felt like New Year's was just yesterday, and here we are, almost, well, not quite the middle of February, but we're getting there. Fitness factor number two. And this one was an interesting one for me just because sleep was never a big thing on my radar as far as the technical understanding. I've always prioritized sleep for myself and I've encouraged it to people, but when we decided upon these fitness factors, you see a couple of them and you start to ask yourself, how much do I know about this topic? And sleep is almost like intuitive, where if you're a health professional, it's almost like you have to say to your clients or anyone who asks you, make sure you sleep well. And that question was the thing that I asked myself in the context of wanting to start to put this lecture together was, what does it mean to sleep well? How do you know if you're sleeping well? And nowadays, you have all kinds of trackable technology, wearable devices, Aura rings, Whoops, Fitbits, what have you. And I think they're wonderful. That being said, they're computing the quality of your sleep from algorithms based upon your pulse, interpreting your heart rate and cross-referencing that against the patterns that we need to understand go with normal aspects of sleep. But when I delved rather into sleep, it really made me understand that sleep isn't just what we think it is. You lie down and close your eyes and you wake up and it's morning. Sleep is a very dynamic, interesting, fascinating process all on its own. So I have a lot of information to convey today. I'm going to try to respect the time frame parameters of what our webinars are. So if I have to speak quickly, it's because I'm trying to get through all the information. And I really hope you guys do enjoy this. Please save some questions to the end. I'll leave some time to get to those if we can. And without further ado, we're going to get to the fundamental question of why humans sleep. And the answer is not simply because they get tired. I tried to think about how I could put this answer in one fluid statement. And I thought about the concept of yin and yang. I'm very big on holistic principles, philosophies, and cycles and completions. So I came up with the idea that when we sleep, we're still active. So sleep isn't this comatose thing. Yes, our bodies aren't moving nearly as much as they are during the day, during our wakeful hours. But sleep in and of itself is both an energy intensive process and a very stimulatory process, because at certain times of sleep, if you were to scan your brain activity would show that there was more dynamic nature in the brain while sleeping during the REM cycles than there may be sitting listening to me, depending on how entertaining and stimulatory I am in terms of educating and providing the information. So I thought about the idea of sleep is the necessity and the rest aspects to balance out the maintenance of what we do to ourselves day to day. When we're awake, we are using all kinds of energetic resources. We're using calories. We're using micronutrients as cofactors. We're stressing different body systems and organs. Our nervous systems, our digestive systems are all getting somewhat of I don't want to say a beating, but they're getting stressed during the day. And at nighttime when we sleep, it's the rest recovery in sleep that allows us to come back to a point of activity and health the following day. So with that philosophy, kind of in your minds, the necessity of sleep is really what helps balance out the yang of the day to the yin of the night so that we can wake up the next day and have optimal energy levels, optimal physiologic function to do everything that it is we want to do. Because sleep really is a holistic thing. Think about if you've had children and they were young, when you didn't sleep through the night for a good solid while because you were sleep training your child, or your child was waking up in the middle of the night multiple times for being hungry or whatever the reason, nothing disrupts not only your physical performance, but your emotional state of mind and your mental aspect of critical thinking and problem solving like sleep deprivation does. So in the context of healthcare and healthcare practitioners, I think sleep is the king. It's the granddaddy of them all, because it's really the only one that has a physical, mental, emotional aspect that you can experience and begin to remedy immediately without the need for anything complex in terms of testing and analysis. And like not being able to out-supplement a bad diet, I've said that you can't take a good multivitamin and a digestive enzyme and just eat fast food or eat at McDonald's all the time. You can't compensate for poor sleep with necessarily other health behaviors or stimulants or anything else that we tell ourselves we can do in order to get over our inability to sleep well. because most people, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of people have this mentality: I'll sleep when I'm dead. And they're kind of predicting the future, because if you take that mentality, you might die before someone who doesn't. And that's kind of morbid, haha, but it's also true. Sleep deprivation is associated with an increased propensity for all factors of all cause mortality. And when it comes to the well being and health of our brains and our nervous systems, nothing will recover us like a good night, or I should say, a few good nights consistently of solid sleep. So we're in a transition of humanity, so to speak. And there's a really, really good book written called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. He is actually referenced in Dr. Eric and Dr. Kelly's book in the sleep aspects, because he has this really good quote. And he said, "We're in the midst of a silent sleep loss epidemic that poses the greatest public health challenge of the 21st century." What does that mean? Well, the way humanity is going, the conditions of society are forcing us to put sleep lower on the totem pole in terms of priority. And as a result of that, all cause mortality and conditions of both acute and chronic degeneration are going to go up. The average sleep time nowadays in North America, the US specifically, from what I could gather, is 7 hours and 19 minutes as of 2022. They say a good night of sleep is in the range of 7 to 9 hours. Some people doing okay, or maybe even better on lesser sleep towards the 7 hour mark. Most people do better 8 towards the 9 hour mark. But most people, including young children and growing adolescents, are checking in at 7:19 or less. Because remember, the vast majority of people sleep less than 7 hours a night. And if you go back 100 years, our sleep schedules, but also our sleep habits have changed dramatically as a race. We used to sleep in what's called biphasic chunks. We would have 2 chunks of 4 to 6 hours with a period of waking in the middle. And, the witching hours is an old saying. It's probably coming back to this biphasic sleep where you would go to sleep for a while, you would wake up, you wouldn't necessarily be fully alert, coherent, although you might, but it would be a time of rest, a time of reflection, possibly meditation, some mindful work, and then you would go back to sleep for another 4 to 6 hours. So on the low side, that's 8 hours of sleep. On the high side, that's 12 hours of sleep. Now we've moved to what's called monophasic sleep, where hopefully we go to sleep at night, we wait a little bit, it feels like a really long blink, and we wake up the next day. As we'll get into, that's typically not what's happening to people nowadays. But the fact that we're sleeping less and less as time goes on is not only a condition of societal conditioning, it's also an aspect of priorities that need to be redistributed as far as people's importance that they're placing on the weight of sleep. So when it comes to the necessity of sleep, we have to understand that there are aspects that have to happen in sleep in a cyclical manner, and there are aspects of sleep that we can compensate for just a little bit because our physiology has a bandwidth of tolerance and stress tolerance built into it. However, I like this quote from Dr. Brené Brown, which is, "Sleep is the way we love our minds and show appreciations to our brains and our lives." Notice how we said not our brains and our bodies, our brains and our lives, encompassing everything that makes up life, because it is the master rhythm of how we regulate health in the body. One poor night of sleep can totally throw off the balance between autonomic control, and you can be stuck in a sympathetically dominant state, which will essentially leave you insulin resistant, possibly growth hormone and testosterone deficient the next day, riding the cortisol train, wanting lots of coffee, wanting lots of sugar, and possibly being quite irritable and short-tempered. But there are other aspects of sleep just besides the acute aspects of what happens in a single night. One of the most important aspects of governing the buildup and breakdown balance of our own physiology and our cells is a process called autophagy. Autophagy is essentially something like when you hire a cleaning crew to come into a house that's really dirty, they scrub everything brand new, so it was like the mess was never made in the first place. When we sleep, we enter a catabolic state. So our body is sustaining itself off of our own energy stores, stored carbohydrates in the liver, stored fats in our fat cells. And only when insulin and other hormones of metabolic function are low and stable does this process of autophagy happen, where we redirect energy resources to breaking down old cellular material and helping our bodies to either recycle this cellular material in the form of proteins and amino acids, or clear the way for the old stuff to go out so that the next day we can start working on building the new stuff when we start to eat again. And those processes are highly linked to immune activity and detoxification, because oftentimes it's the immune system that's stimulating autophagy within the cells, but it's the detoxification pathways that are clearing all these things out, as I said, to make way for the new, machinery, if you will, that the cells build. Other aspects of sleep on a physiological level are things like metabolic regulation of energy metabolism. So, how insulin sensitive you are, how well you can burn fats for energy, looking at things like long term memory consolidation and learning capabilities. A night of sleep, or rather, a night of sleep where you sleep 5 hours or less is, they say, equivalent to driving with a blood alcohol level of 0.05. So a lack of sleep can give you the reflexes of someone who's slightly inebriated. And when we want to actually learn and commit things that we learn that day to memory, sleep is the precipitous aspect of what helps long-term memory consolidation, where you take short-term things you remember and enhance them and convert them to long-term memories that you can access for future use. And that's just a little bit of it, but just understanding those processes alone make up what I think the foundational aspects are of healthy physiology and healthy mental performance. But the thing that we really need to understand with sleep is part of a bigger rhythm. Life is really all about rhythms. If you look at the seven hermetic principles, rhythm is one of the seven things that governs the laws of natural law. So we have to understand that the circadian rhythm is really what underpins how to optimize your sleep quality. And the circadian rhythm is really simply related to light cycles of light and dark. When the sun rises, when the sun sets, the duration of time it's dark outside, and the moon is the dominant source of light, and how that cycle begins the next day. And if you look at this graphic in greater detail, you'll start to see that certain aspects of physiology have their most optimal performances at very specific times of day, because the circadian rhythm is there so our physiology knows what to do, when to do it. So when the light cycles are up, we should be stimulated, energetic, active. And when the light cycle closes down for the day, we should be more relaxed, restful, and beginning to sleep so we can recover, as I said, to balance out the yin and yang as it relates to our day. And we can see that within our own physiology. We have cortisol and melatonin. There are two almost counter-regulatory hormones. One is a wakeful hormone. It's a glucocorticoid. So when we wake up in the morning and we get light that stimulates not only our skin, but our eyes, our cortisol levels rise. And when our cortisol levels rise, our body starts to break down stored energy, increase the activity of our nervous system, increase the activity of our cardiovascular system, release all the hormones, because that's the message that cortisol sends to the body as it relates to the rhythm. This is light stimulated, so it's light cycle dominant. As the sun sets for the day, cortisol starts to drop off dramatically after 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the evening. And providing we don't compromise our circadian rhythm, which I will talk about very soon, our body starts to naturally elevate melatonin, which is not necessarily a sleep-inducing hormone, but it's more of a cycle-regulating hormone, because the breakdown processes of autophagy, what I mentioned prior, is stimulated by melatonin and other hormones that help to stimulate catabolic processes. So we're clearing out waste material in the body, getting rid of it through detoxification, and starting off the next day hopefully fresh and clean so we can start building again. And there's just this thing called Chinese medicine. Some of you might have heard of it. It's been around for 2,500 years. This is one of the principles that underpin Chinese medicine, and I'm personally fascinated with this kind of stuff because they correlate it not only with time, with aspects of the body that are most active and what those aspects of the body need to accomplish, but they also relate it to aspects of emotional states, behavior, and if you believe in the five element theory, the concept of balance is at the core of all of this. So if you want to, delve a little bit deeper into this, you can understand why possibly a client may be waking up at 3 a.m. every day. And if you can correlate maybe what the Chinese calendar says with aspects of a liver function test, hypothetically, or aspects related to that, there may be some value in this. The whole thing works based upon our body's ability to interact with light. I found this stuff fascinating years ago when I started to dive into it, because most people don't think of our eyes being anything else than a camera, but our eyes are both a camera to see the world around us and a clock, meaning our eyes are the thing that allows our body to know what time of day it is. If you stop and think about that for a second, have you ever thought, how does our body know when to be awake and when to sleep? It's the light cycle in the context of how it interacts with this specialized little thing in our brain. If you want to sound like the smartest person at a dinner party, memorize the word superchiasmatic nucleus, not charismatic, but chiasmatic nucleus. And it connects the incoming light that comes into our eyes, which has different wavelengths. If you see the room that I'm in right now, I have a green light in the room for very specific reasons. So the light that is emitted from the sun at different times of day has different wavelengths. That light goes into our eyes, our brain interprets the information in that light signal, and then appropriately coordinates the release of all the hormones in our body via control of the hypothalamus, but also regulates all the functions of our nervous system via light. I think that is incredibly cool. And I'm hoping that some of you are already going to the idea of what happens when you're looking at light coming off of a TV or a smartphone at 11 o'clock while you may be in bed scrolling through Instagram. But I don't assume anyone on this call here does that, right? Of course not. But what happens if you did? Well, if you have teenagers, they make a career of this for a short period of time. I don't know why it is. It's something that has to probably relate to the development of the nervous system and the surge of hormones and changing every aspect of biorhythms. But if you have the wrong light exposure at the wrong time of day, you essentially scramble that whole circadian rhythm. So when most people should be getting sleepy and going to a place where they're dimming overhead lights, they're not looking at electronics excessively, maybe they're reading this old school thing called a book, that's when the body is naturally going to show you its display of relaxed fatigue and induce a sleep state. However, if you compromise that, what you're doing is you're giving your body a morning, daytime wakeful signal at night when your body should be receiving anything but that. And instead of making enough melatonin and regulating the build-up breakdown processes and ensuring that you get a good night's sleep, what you're telling your body is, I need to be awake, I need to be stimulated, I need to be energetic. So rather than making melatonin, you're going to blunt your melatonin release naturally, and you're going to start to raise cortisol at a time when cortisol is not meant to be raised. So you will get stimulated, but you will not get energetic. And that's an essential thing to know, because most of society who are unwell are in some form of rhythm in connection with this cycle. So we want to understand this, plus the whole time zone hopping thing that airplanes have made very possible these days, are an incredibly stressful thing on the body that it always has to compensate for. I used to travel to Southeast Asia once a quarter for about 2 years. I used to run a clinic over there, and I would do a 12-hour time flip, and I would be there for 2 to 4 weeks. And by week 2, I would have just adjusted to the 12-hour time zone change, because they say it's about 1 day per hour of time difference. So if I was there for 2 weeks, I felt like a bag of crap for 2 weeks. I would finally get on a normal sleep schedule. Then I'd go back to North America and I'd start the process all over again. I don't want to know how much time it may have taken off of my health span or my life. I'm just going to assume that with my knowledge, I can, abide by what will regenerate me. But it's an important thing to consider if you have clients that change time zones. And I don't mean 12-hour time zone flips. I mean, if they're going from Eastern time to Central, back to Eastern to Pacific multiple times per month, that will have a negative impact on their health at some point. So then, talking about circadian rhythm, we need to understand that there is a way to optimize it. And there are certain strategies that I would not encourage everyone to start adopting everything tomorrow if it's entirely far away from what you're used to, but start thinking about how you can make some of these things fit into your lifestyle, because some people might be quite shocked by some of them. The first one is quite intuitive. Pick a regular wake-up time. The body likes habitual processes that are ingrained. So the more you can pick a regular wake-up time in conjunction with a regular bedtime, that's going to help your body get into a natural cycle where the consistency of your sleep will become better. The second thing is, what you do when you wake up matters. Don't grab your phone and start scrolling through things first thing in the morning. The body wants natural light. So if you have the ability to get outside at this time of year, I'm down in Florida, so I have no excuse. I literally get up, grab water, walk outside, and get the sun on my face for 5 to 10 minutes if I can. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere like Jeff, he's hopefully looking out the window, probably wishing for warmer weather and counting, how many inches of snow are outside. But that being said, at least he's getting natural light exposure, because it will come through glass and the benefits will still be there. Being hydrated is a foregone conclusion, but if you haven't had a sip of water in 7 to 9 hours because you've been sleeping, bringing water in first thing you do when you wake up is very important, and it's way more important than reaching for coffee. Most people roll out of bed and they're thinking about coffee, in the last phase of their dreams because that's the habit. Caffeine consumption is kind of a double-edged sword. We'll talk about it a little bit more in depth afterwards, but if you look at the research, the real benefits of not only caffeine, but caffeine's ability to improve performance come from waiting to have your first cup of coffee. So when you wake up, there's still a lot of adenosine floating around in your brain. And adenosine is the molecule that builds up as a result of just brain energy metabolism that makes you tired. So you want to make sure that you properly clear the adenosine before you have caffeine, because we'll figure out those two mechanistically are very linked. So not only can the benefits of coffee not be fully experienced if you have it first thing in the morning, but your ability to start the day properly and maximize your natural energy production and feelings of wakefulness will get compromised if you have caffeine within a few minutes of, getting out of bed. I do say either go outside, this is the same rule as being somewhere in the warm weather, or get natural sunlight as much as you can between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Between 10 and 2 is when the sun releases ultraviolet light, and contrary to popular belief, no, it will not fry you instantaneously and give you skin cancer. Getting small amounts of ultraviolet light are essential. They're also highly stimulatory, so they help maximize natural energy production. The romantic in me always wants to say observe a sunset if you have the ability to do so. It does two strong benefits. Number one, it helps you subconsciously know that the day is done. So as the sun goes down, it's a trigger to not be so active if possible. But observing a sunset also allows you to get the last rays of light, so your body knows that the natural light cycle is done. Now it's time to focus on stimulating darkness and absorbing the benefits of being able to relax. That's why I think blue blockers or using very specific kinds of lights, i.e. turning off very bright overhead lights. If you have high efficiency LED bulbs, please do yourself a benefit because they can be carcinogenic to your health. And then get some lights that are evening appropriate, something that's got a more orange, red, warm glow, or something like a salt lamp. And the only other aspects to this, which are pretty self-explanatory, are create a bedtime routine that works for you. Have some tea, do some deep breathing meditation, and to adhere to a regular sleep time that complements your regular wake-up time, knowing that life happens. At times, you're going to need to compromise this as a result of possibly going out, possibly something you don't expect. But if you use the 80-20 rule or the 90-10 rule, and you're not doing any of this now, these shifts, which you will experience the benefits of, not immediately, but cumulatively as time goes on, will be massively impactful for you. And how these things relate to sleep is our ability to regulate a circadian rhythm lends maximal opportunity to optimize our sleep processes. What I mean by processes, there are various aspects of different experiences, different aspects of sleep to consider. So what I did was I highlighted the four main categories that are part of the fitness factors in the thyroid debacle, just to kind of dive a little bit more deeply in there. And to categorize them, to understand them first, we need to know that sleep deprivation, when I say that, I'm talking total time consideration, nightly and both weekly. So you can have one night of sleep deprivation, or you can be chronically sleep deprived if you sleep less than 7 hours a night. Sleep restriction is a bout of sleep that's under the minimum requirement. So a restricted sleep will lead to sleep deprivation. That's how those two connect. And out of sync sleep is the misalignment of your natural circadian rhythm and body clock with how the environment should do so. And incomplete sleep is sleep with compromised sleep cycles. And we'll understand what sleep cycles are coming up. So if you ever talk to your clients about sleep, I think this is a really good way to identify what their big problem with sleep is, so you can figure out if it's a lifestyle thing that needs to be addressed. Is it a supplemental thing that needs to be addressed? Is it a mental thing? Do they need to actually get things off of their mind and talk to someone because they're internalizing, and as a result, they can't shut off? I think these categories are really beneficial because they're self-explanatory, and you're not going to the depths of explaining sleep spindles and various things, which are going to make people check out. So sleep continuity, as I define it, is the ability to sleep continuously through the night without major interruption. In doing my research, I found out some interesting stuff. I didn't know this, but as you age, the experience of waking up in the middle of the night and going back to sleep is actually not a worrisome thing, providing it's a very short wake up. So as we sleep as kids, And first of all, if anyone ever says sleep like a baby, don't ever want to sleep like a baby. That means you're going to sleep for about 20 to 30 minutes. You're going to wake up and you're going to scream. Then you're going to do that over and over and over again until you've had enough for the night. So what we want is we want sleep more like a log, ideally. Babies are not the gold standard or the end all and be all. But a lot of people do have issues with sleep continuity for a majority of reasons. I've listed the various external factors that I talk to my clients about to make sure that there's nothing that they're doing, meaning it's not an external influence. Because if you take away all the external influences, it typically means it's an internal influence, meaning something in the physiology isn't right. Because when the body's unhealthy and we're in a sympathetically dominant state, the ability to get restful sleep is less likely and less capable. So understanding meal timing is very important because your digestive system doesn't want to be breaking down a steak at 9:30 p.m. at night. So the easiest strategy there is to set a regular meal time that allows that client to walk the line between not feeling hungry too early before bed, but not eating too late to compromise their sleep because their digestive system is too active. And it is a little clue if your clients are waking up in the middle of the night and they're feeling super hungry or thirsty, what could be compromising them is some sort of metabolic stress, hypoglycemia, dehydration, what have you. The other thing to look at when it comes to meal consumption is, are they drinking caffeine too late in the day? Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours in the average person. Some people it's longer, some people it's shorter. But if you're having 100 milligrams of caffeine at noon, at 6 p.m., there's still 50 milligrams in your bloodstream, which means at midnight, there's still 25 milligrams in your bloodstream. So my suggestion is, 8 hours before sleep, if you can, that's the last coffee or tea of the day, especially if someone is incredibly caffeine sensitive. Alcohol is another thing. Alcohol is a sedative. So people might think that they can drink, a beer or have a glass of wine in the evening and they get better sleep because they experience feeling more relaxed and tired. This is true. That does happen. But falling asleep, staying asleep, and getting restful sleep are three different things. Caffeine is another. I know people who pride themselves in being able to have an espresso after dinner and go to bed. You will fall asleep, but your sleep won't be very good. So making sure that someone is not over abusing either the stimulants or the sedatives surrounding sleep, especially knowing that any of them, no matter how little in excess, will compromise your sleep quality. Sleeping pills are of the same, nature. Room temperature is a very big deal. There's an optimal reference range for room temperature between 60 and 67 is what they say is optimal from a perspective of your body's ability to enjoy the external environment and optimize sleep. And then there are other things that are more lifestyle specific that are, again, very client to client, but looking at their partners or their children's sleeping habits, if there's someone who's easily affected, finding a way to compromise in that regard to make sure that they can get their restful sleep. Light exposure, as I mentioned. That's why using blue blocking glasses, we have a connection with Hedron. Those are wonderful. I make all my clients use them because sleep for me is king. So if it's a low hanging fruit, why not actually, grab that while it's possible? And then mental stress load and overall health status, as I mentioned, are going to be things that compromise sleep continuity. And sleep continuity and sleep quality are very interlinked. So for sleep quality, we're really talking about what's called a sleep cycle. And believe it or not, sleep cycles are very defined things. There's two balance points that creates a sleep cycle. We have non-REM sleep, and REM stands for rapid eye movement, and we have REM sleep. So fundamentally, what happens is our body enters a state of light sleep, stage one, and they say it's about 1 to 5 minutes. This is where our brains are not necessarily conscious, but they're still active because we are very close to being in our waking state. As we get deeper and deeper into stage two and stage three sleep, we get a relaxing of the body and we get a deepening of brainwave. So we go down to what's called the delta brainwave, which is typically, the area where we have the greatest degree of mental, emotional, and physiologic recovery. Stage 4 is the deepest sleep, and we'll talk about why stage 4 is so apparent and so essential afterwards. And when we get into REM, we get into the state where our bodies become incredibly paralyzed and our eyes start to move laterally in various patternistic ways, and our brain lights up like a Christmas tree in terms of activity. So they say REM sleep is the reset point between cycles because each sleep cycle lasts approximately 90 minutes. And if quick math is correct on my end, having on the low side 4 to about 6 cycles per night is what you want to aim for in terms of the overall sleep quality based upon getting appropriate sleep cycles. These things are hard to describe verbally, so I just wanted to give you something visually. So at the top left-hand side, we fall asleep, we get into stage one, lightest sleep, we go deeper, deeper, deeper. Then we get down to a burst of non-REM, we come up, burst of REM sleep, short pulse, start the process again. And what's interesting about a sleep cycle is the early part of our sleep is biased towards non-REM sleep. If you look at this graph, we only get stage 4 during the early parts of the evening. So the beginning parts of sleep, which should be roughly from around 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., that's focused on our deep sleep cycles, which is incredibly important for physiologic recovery. As the day, or rather the night goes on, we have less of a focus on deep sleep and a much longer focus on REM sleep, which is why when you wake up remembering your dreams, you woke up at the appropriate end of a sleep cycle, because REM sleep is typically correlated with highest states and activities based upon dreaming. And that means if the early part of the night is focused on physiologic recovery, the latter part of the evening is focused on mental aspects of recovery for the brain and the nervous system. So I thought that was really interesting. And if your clients are biasing when they go to bed, or if they're telling you they're waking up at certain parts, you can start to intuit what aspects of your sleep, or their sleep, I should say, are beginning to be compromised. Now, what I said is not entirely complete, because again, there are more nuance and more variables, but from a fundamental framework, that is what's happening. And then in terms of all of this stuff, it's sleep consistency, and it's consistency that helps with sleep quality. So as I mentioned before, the most important factor is making the above aspect a regular experience. You want to define what your natural rhythm is. And each person has a natural rhythm. And something that's quite interesting that you can do with yourself and with all your clients is figure out what their chronotype is. Are you an early to bed, early to rise type? Are you a night owl, late rise type? There are aspects of natural physiological preferences that will trump, objective or subjective sleep data. So the most important thing is getting into a natural rhythm, and the consistency checklist is a very important thing that I use with my clients that I think would be a wise thing for everyone to start implementing in some way in your practice if you haven't already done so. So we want to make sure that we can sleep and maximize sleep on all fronts. And these two activities are not necessarily promoted to be going together, but hey, it might be more of a time efficient thing. So we want to maximize sleep every possible way we can. These are my list of sleep enhancers. First and foremost is hydration, as I mentioned. I think hydration is one of those things like sleep where it's a foregone conclusion that we assume people are hydrated because they're not telling you they're thirsty. I also believe that a lot of chronic illness comes from chronic dehydration, because if your cells are chronically inflamed, the cell danger response, for example, is being triggered, your ability to bring nutrition into a cell and to evacuate waste material, which is a massive aspect of water exchange, doesn't happen. Most people are mineral deficient, or they're drinking water that is of poor quality. Just because you drink water, it doesn't mean that you're properly saturating your cells with water, as I take a sip. So regular hydration, again, it's an easy checklist item if you can teach your clients the benefits of it, that will help to remove any potential aspects of what might be compromising their sleep. Regular exercise is another thing. A lot of modern lifestyle stimulates us to be sympathetically dominant, which means our nervous system is wired to be in a fight or flight state, and all aspects of health and healing require us to be able to access the opposite of sympathetic dominance, which is a parasympathetic state. Because of people's daily lifestyles, activity that drives the stress response, what have you, you need something to help vent that physical and mental energy. So the appropriate amount of exercise and the various kinds of exercise, coming from, high intensity HIIT training in small quantities, various aspects of resistance training to focus on metabolic efficiency and stimulate the nervous system in a very specific way, And something that's called zone 2 cardio is what I try to help my clients structure into their day, because each aspect of exercise has the ability to help regenerate and rebalance autonomic control. And when you've properly exercised and expended energy during the day, as we would have 100 years ago when we did a lot more manual labor, our bodies would be craving sleep at night. The third aspect is morning sunlight and total daytime light exposure with no sunglasses on. There is some good research that correlates the quality of sleep to the quantity of total daytime light exposure. So if you work in an office, this becomes a little harder. You have to become a little bit more creative. Working with your desk near a window is an awesome opportunity if you have the ability to do so. And taking regular breaks to go outside, go for a walk on your lunch, eating your lunch outside, you might not think it has a massive effect, but if you add up the total amount of time that you spend in front of a screen versus the amount of time you spend in front of the sun, it might shock you. As mentioned before, I like the idea of not eating 3 hours prior to bed. 2 hours is probably my low side, because you want your body to have done its last energy intensive process of digestion long enough before bed, so that food is at the point where it's being absorbed into the bloodstream and sustaining you overnight, rather than sitting like a lump in your stomach as you're rolling over. And if you do eat before bed, little trick, because your stomach empties to the left, try to fall asleep on the left hand side of your body. Number 5 is a hard sell, especially for teenagers: avoidance of electronic devices at night. My clients tell me that they like to watch Netflix in bed before they go to sleep. So I say buy some blue light glasses at the very least, or possibly find some sort of app on your phone or your computer to minimize the emittance of light. You can use a program called Flux. If you have an iPhone, you can use a product or program called Night Shift. There's one called Twilight on an Android phone. So these things are going to be beneficial as little check marks in the positive column when it comes to regenerating your ability to not disrupt melatonin production. And then throwing out these high efficiency bulbs. Look, I know they're wonderful for the pocketbook when it comes to the energy bill at the end of the day, but the reason high efficiency bulbs work is because what the technology does is it removes all of the inefficient light spectrums from the bulb. It's why you can touch one of those LED bulbs if it's been on for 6 hours and you don't burn your fingers. They take away all of the infrared and lower frequencies, the red, the orange, the yellow, and they hyper concentrate the blue frequency so it looks white. So while it does emit a lot of light, that amount of blue light, perpetually being exposed to your cells, not only your eyes, but your skin has photoreceptors. It is actually quite carcinogenic in a context as it induces energy toxicity. And then some other aspects that I do like to bring in are some kind of deep breathing meditation exercises. Again, whatever resonates with you. There's plenty of apps with guided meditation. Anything where you can do deep breathing and focus on inhalation through the diaphragm will help stimulate the parasympathetic nerve fibers of the lower abdomen, which actually come out near the sacrum. And most people chest and shallow breathe these days, which is a sympathetic dominant subconscious behavior. So even 5 to 10 minutes of deep breathing can help induce someone to be much more relaxed in the evening. And then the last thing to focus on, because we've talked about moving with the sun as the year does, going to bed earlier in the winter and staying up a little bit later in the summer, is the use of strategic supplementation. There are various natural sleep aids. You want to stay away from anything pharmacological because they won't allow you to get into those deeper stages of ultimate recovery in sleep. So focusing on the things that help stimulate the nervous system to be downregulated, to quiet the mind if possible, to induce non-habit forming sleep use, things like, valerian root teas and what have you. I find these to be very successful with people who are chronically sleep deprived or have never been able to find a good sleep cycle, and they are people who go to alcohol or use something like an Ambien in the evening. So this is my sleep checklist, and we've gone through all of these things, so I'll skip over going through a detailed explanation, but I hope these things are valuable to all of you in terms of how they could be used potentially tomorrow in a clinical setting. And clients do like checklist items, as you know, they like action items that they can adhere to, because the goal isn't to overhaul everything that's wrong and change it tomorrow. It's to progressively create new habits that are at first modifications of existing behaviors. So the idea of having a sleep checklist will be beneficial because certain things will resonate with certain people, but at the very least, if no one is doing any of these things now, anything is a step in the right direction. And when it comes to caffeine, and look, I love coffee. If someone tells me that there's no more coffee left on the planet, I'm going to be a very, very sad person. But caffeine has a dark side, as I mentioned. How caffeine works from fundamentally is it tricks your brain into not thinking it is fatigued as it is. And there's a biochemical process that the brain experiences a lot because the buildup of adenosine is as a result of just brain energy metabolism. The brain is probably the most energy hungry organ in the body, using 10 to 15% of the calories that you eat in its basal metabolic function. So when adenosine binds to receptors, it basically is kind of, as I see it, kind of like a fail safe to protect the neurons from overstimulation. Adenosine down regulates brain energy expenditure through the experience of fatigue. Caffeine obviously does the opposite. It makes you feel that you're not tired, or it makes you feel that you're quite stimulated. So it can temporarily mask fatigue, but if used at the wrong time, it can throw off natural rhythms. That's why the research says you want to clear out the natural adenosine from your body. And if you want to use caffeine, because it has not only mental performance enhancement characteristics, but it has physical performance enhancing characteristics if you're an athlete or you're active, use caffeine at earliest 60 minutes after you wake up, and understand that the average person probably doesn't need more than 200 to 300 milligrams of coffee to get the best results out of their performance. If you're getting like a grande or a venti pike from Starbucks, that sucker might have 600 to 700 milligrams of caffeine. So understand that not all coffee is created equal. If you make your coffee naturally via a pour over style, that's going to be far less caffeinated than if you go and you get a nitro cold brew, which has enough caffeine to stimulate a water buffalo, but they are delicious. And then the aspect of sleep and brain health kind of got a new lease on life in the last few years, because we as a race, this is incredible to me, discovered that the brain does in fact have a lymphatic system. There was a hotly, I guess, debated theory that the brain was sterile of an immune system, because we couldn't identify if there was an active lymphatic system in the brain that ducted aspects of brain metabolism back into the circulatory systems of the rest of the body. But lo and behold, we have a glymphatic system. And if you think about it, it makes sense. What happens in the development of chronic degenerative conditions? The brain becomes chronically inflamed. Like if you look at Alzheimer's, they actually call it type 3 diabetes, which means the mitochondria in the brain can't burn carbohydrates effectively for fuel. So the cells go into a danger response state to where they can't function optimally. So the glymphatic system helps to deal with the metabolic clearing of wastes that come from normal brain activity. It's just a natural fact of physiology that using your physiology, it gets dirty to some degree. You build up metabolic wastes as a result of energy metabolism, biochemical reactions. And if you don't get that metabolic waste out of the brain, it essentially floats around in the cerebral spinal fluid and the glymphatic system. And the glymphatic system is only active, maximally active, during stage 3 and 4 of non-REM sleep. So if you are engaging in practices like too much alcohol consumption before bed, too much caffeine too late in the day, looking at bright lights in the evening and blunting your melatonin release, which is really one of the body's most potent antioxidants, I would argue the most potent antioxidant in the brain, you're overloading your glymphatic system without clearing it. You're throwing off the natural balance of that rhythm. And if you do that chronically, habitually over the course of months to years, is it any wonder we're seeing such a rise in neurodegenerative conditions as a result of poor brain clearance and thus compromised brain energy metabolism? Because a neuron has probably about 2,000 mitochondria per cell at minimum. So just think about that for a sec. So a lot of stuff coming your way, guys. I'm hoping that was incredibly interesting as I found it, because it really made me take stock of my sleep and have deeper analysis for my own quality of sleep and processes. So I want to link things that we as a company offer that can be of use when it comes to not only helping sleep, but how to supplement and piggyback the benefits of sleep. What I mean by that is actually is having a conversation with Jeff and Larry, and the idea of understanding that you can use sleep to enhance the supplemental effects experienced by the body was something that I think is very valuable to talk about, because I don't think a lot of people think about things that way other than using sleep aids as a supplement specifically. So this is how we're intersecting with master supplements, US enzymes, and tomorrow's nutrition with the concept of sleep. So the first aspect is to promote relaxation via the nervous system. We don't have a sleep aid. We don't have a melatonin product. We don't have a product that induces sleepiness, but we have an incredibly well-researched product that crosses the blood-brain barrier to help relax neuronal activity. The second aspect is through modulation of the microbiome and inflammation. We are a digestive wellness company at our core. The gut microbiome and the connection to the immune system will always come back because, as I mentioned earlier in the lecture, someone's health status will be connected to the quality of their sleep. When people are healthy, they sleep well because the body is able to do so. When the body is imbalanced, sleep is going to be disturbed. And this is an important, reciprocal relationship we need to understand. And the last one is what I just mentioned, via the ability to piggyback sleep as to when to use certain supplements, because some of the products we have, namely systemic enzymes, need to have optimally suited conditions to be most efficacious in what they're trying to do. So let's get into that. The first thing really is all about understanding the nervous system. So the nervous system is one of the aspects that most closely ties to sleep, and I believe it's one of the most important aspects to know about in the human body if you don't already, because the nervous system and the brain are essentially the internal CPU and all the associated wiring of what controls and connects to everything in the body. Remember, it's an input-output system, so there's tons of information coming into the nervous system all the time, and then the output of the nervous system is organizing the appropriate responses. And that's why I use something like heart rate variability as such an important metric in measuring my clients' health, because you can get an overall sense of how healthy their rhythms are and their physiology is based upon how the autonomic nervous system balances itself out. Most neurons function this way. There's a signal that comes in, so the body interprets a signal, it analyzes it, and then it organizes an appropriate response. And typically, these responses are electrochemical. So the signal will come down the neuron, down the axon of the presynapse, the neuron above, and it will induce a release of a very specific modulator called a neurotransmitter, and it will throw that neurotransmitter across a gap so the signal can be continued, and then the end result is whatever specific action the body needs to perform is the end result. So it's electrical signal down, the creation of neurotransmitters bind, the appropriate signal from those neurotransmitters is received, and this is essentially the game of broken telephone. And these gaps are 5 micrometers wide. They're so much narrower than that of a single human hair. And these processes are things that are either stimulatory in the context of something like glutamate or inhibitory in the context of GABA. So that's where the first product really comes in. And we're talking about the understanding the balance between the upregulation of the central nervous system, excitatory aspects of glutamate, and the downregulation of the central nervous system, the inhibitory aspects of GABA. And why this is important is, theoretically speaking, an excessively overexcited neuron will stress itself out and potentially burn itself out. And if you start to stress neurons out, you start to cleave neural connections, because a neural connection can be made, but once it's been broken and cleaved, it's hard to restore that connection again. So that's where the product that we use, suntheanine, comes in. Most people assume that what theanine does is it increases GABA. It's not actually true. What theanine does is it binds to the area that the amino acid glutamine does, which prevents it from upregulating glutamate, because glutamate and GABA are both made from the amino acid glutamine. So as a result, when someone is taking supplemental suntheanine, they're not promoting GABA dominance. They are downregulating or inhibiting the binding of glutamate, thus balancing out the amount of glutamate to GABA so that nerve or that neuron specifically is able to calm down. So theanine is not a sedative, but rather it helps prevent the central nervous system from being overly stimulated to a degree. And it does so because it is a non-protein amino acid, meaning it's not an essential amino acid. Typically, it's found in various plant substances. And this is why some people who can't deal with coffee can do quite well with green tea, because green tea, specifically matcha green tea, has a high quantity of theanine. So when taken together, it helps tabletop the stimulatory effects of caffeine without the agitation and the following caffeine crash. So the whole focus on theanine is it helps balance out the central nervous system when it's engaged in excessive unconscious vigilance. It can help manage neuronal stress, rather. And the third aspect is you can't ever turn off the brain, and we use a lot of these catchphrases to mean things. The brain is never off. The brain is just in different phases and states associated with different brain waves. So in the evening, you don't want to be in a high alpha, high beta brainwave, which is what someone's doing when they're in the middle of their workday with a lot of mental focus. You want to be in more of a theta delta state, which is more meditative, sleep, dream associated states. So theanine is one of the things that you can use as an evening supplement in conjunction with everything else we've spoken about as an effective strategy to help teach someone's nervous system that it's okay to not be so vigilant all the time. And from a research perspective, 100 to 300 milligrams of theanine before bed, or you can even use it multiple times a day with those who are caffeine sensitive, is not only safe, it's highly effective, especially sun-theanine, because its ability to cross the blood-brain barrier to get directly where you want it to go is quite seamless. And theanine is one of those supplements where, going up to a gram doesn't show any adverse effects. There's just really no point in going up that high. So the second aspect of how we look at improving sleep is in the context of, well, if the gut's not happy, if the microbiome is not happy, that means the enteric nervous system, the central nervous system, the immune system, the metabolic pathways, and the detoxification pathways aren't happy. And I know that's a lot, but it really does show you that one thing connects to everything else. So the key here is the word could. Anything that alters neurotransmission within a nerve could disrupt sleep. All those neurotransmitters that I mentioned in the brain exist in the gut. In many cases, 10 times the quantity in the gut than in the brain. Example, most of the serotonin made in our bodies is actually derived by enteroendocrine cells in our gut or chemically modified by the microbes that convert amino acids into postbiotic compounds known as neurotransmitters. Any disruption in the communication between the enteric nervous system, which has more neurons than a dog's brain, and our own brain could disrupt sleep. That's why people wake up with nonspecific anxiety sometimes when they have chronic dysbiosis. Chronic systemic inflammation and immune activation could disrupt sleep. Why? Well, when the body's inflamed and the immune system's upregulated, that's an energy-intensive process. That doesn't allow us to get into those deeper stages of sleep because the immune system's not able to help clear out old waste material. It's fighting a battle with a bacteria, a fungi, a virus, what have you. Metabolic dysregulation and hypoglycemia could disrupt sleep. If your blood sugar crashes at 2 a.m., you're waking up and you probably want to go to the fridge. So understanding that's very important. And the last thing is specific microbial imbalances. So here we can talk about SIBO, dysbiosis, parasites, candida, or unfortunately all of them could disrupt sleep. So working on the digestive system, and I'll say this over and over again, if you get the gut better, to some degree, everything else gets better. It may not fix it, but it will dramatically add some sort of positive benefit or remedy. And then there's actually dealing with inflammation directly. Jeff Thurston shared some great research regarding sulforaphane, specifically the active component in sulforazyme, which is one of the most powerful stimulators of a process in the body called NRF2. NRF2 is the master regulator of the body's endogenous antioxidants. So if someone is stuck in a cycle of being chronically inflamed, and again, this is not meaning that this will cure everyone's sleep disruptions, but if someone's stuck in a healing cycle and they can't break the pattern, using something like this strategically could actually, be more like putting a fire blanket over some burning embers. It might be the thing that helps them break the cycle and get out of a chronic state of oxidative stress. And, in the gut microbiome, we have so many different options and opportunities from the product portfolio. We have products that are focused on specifying, anti-inflammatory cytokines in the colon, Trubifido Pro. There's the stimulation of both sides of the equation systemically with Theralac Pro. Truflora has the ability to stimulate large production of lactic acid. So a lot of the problems that people deal with when it comes to fungal overgrowth or SIBO are typically small intestine related. If someone's had a course of antibiotics, that critical window post antibiotics to replete the gut with something like bioenzyme is really important. And then if someone has the inability to clear something in their gut and some cleansing is required, using something like Cleanzyme in conjunction with one of these probiotics can be quite beneficial. I pulled this quote from a research paper I read with this very specific title. And in the context of what they looked at the quality of sleep in relation to the composition and diversity of the microbiome. And they said that our findings initiate linkages between gut microbiome composition, sleep physiology, the immune system, and cognition. So everything that I mentioned prior to this, talking about the various axes of connections and pathways in the body, can be affected based upon the diversity in the gut and the ability to maintain health or dysfunction in the microbiome. So they concluded that, they may lead to mechanisms to improve sleep through the manipulation of the gut microbiome. If murder's on the table, don't take it off, if that metaphor applies. And then the last aspect here is utilizing sleep to strategically supplement before bed. So systemic enzymes and probiotics before bed are my go-to because there are certain conditions that you need in order to optimize the body's ability to benefit from these substances. Because what the enzymes do is they don't create magic themselves. Their effects are supporting the immune system at very specific sites of inflammatory dysfunction within the body. So if I use a specific example, if someone has chronic respiratory issues, CPROS S helps to break down mucolytic proteins that are potentially causing an upregulation of inflammation and activity in the immune system. So we want empty stomach conditions, or else your proteolytic enzyme, which is not an inexpensive product, becomes a glorified digestive enzyme. We want some aspect of physiologic stability. So within reason, I put down there, because we're sleeping at night, we're not necessarily physiologic stable, but we're less active and there's less variance in what our bodies are dealing with than the middle of the day. And it's really about enhanced recuperation. So we want to work with the natural rhythms of the body when it comes to healing, knowing that to break these patterns and cycles, these supplements need to be used not daily, weekly, but daily and weekly for a period of time, so the signal can be appropriately received by the body. The body's natural defenses can be essentially supported and highlight the ability to resolve any kind of chronic inflammatory response that's keeping that client sick in the first place. And with that, everyone, the end is not near. The end is now. So thank you very much. I hope that was informative. I hope that was beneficial. It was interesting for everyone. Thank you for being part of another. What was this? This was our second fitness factor for the month. Respiratory is next. And if sleep was any indication of the journey that it took me on, I'm hoping to provide everyone something very similar with our next in-depth examination in March. So thank you very much.